Have you ever pondered if the deity Yahweh was exclusively known to the ancient Israelites, or if his name, presence, and worship extended far beyond the confines of their ancient nation? Imagine this. Even before Moses ascended Mount Sinai, before the 10 Commandments were etched in stone, but the awe-inspiring reality of one who simply is, who was, who is, and who forever shall be. Reflect on the comfort inherent in this. In a world characterized by constant change, decay, and impermanence, what does it signify to anchor your life in a God whose very name transcends the passage of time? And here, the mystery deepens, akin to descending into a cavern illuminated by flickering torches. Stating, "At that time, people began to call upon the name of the Lord." And what does he do? He builds an altar and calls upon the name of Yahweh. Observe the continuity. Abraham was not initiating a new worship practice or discovering an unfamiliar deity. He was invoking a name that reverberated through his ancestral memory. Does it not send a shiver down your spine to consider that even after the confusion of Babel, even after countless descents into idolatry, the name Yahweh still echoed among faithful hearts? Could it be that throughout these intricate generations, there consistently existed a hidden remnant who cherished his name, even as the world plunged headlong into the worship of powerless idols? What if there were men and women who steadfastly refused to let the sacred name slip from their lips, safeguarding it like a secret treasure passed from father to son, mother to daughter? This compels us to recognize something truly breathtaking. God was never a distant spectator, merely awaiting the emergence of Israel. No, he was perpetually present, constantly reaching out like a shepherd calling into foggy hills for lost sheep. Even before there was a chosen nation, there were chosen souls drawn to his voice, constructing rudimentary stone altars, whispering Yahweh into the starlit night. And does this not resonate with your own life? Could it be that God's name, his invitation to intimate communion, has been pursuing you long before you ever thought to seek him? If you had lived in that era, would you have joined Enosh and his kin, raising your hands toward the heavens with trembling awe? Would you have followed Abraham into foreign lands simply to continue calling on that same eternal name? There's even more to this profound mystery, more layers to unveil, more secrets to discover. So let's continue to unearth this ancient trail, for the worship of Yahweh extends deeper than we ever imagined. And that Lord is none other than YHWH, or Yahweh. Let that truth settle within you for a moment. This occurred during the days of Enosh, the grandson of Adam himself. Can you envision it? Humanity was just beginning to learn how to survive outside Eden's gates, still wiping tears of exile from their eyes. Yet they were already lifting their voices to the heavens and calling upon Yahweh. Isn't that astonishing? Only a few fragile generations removed from creation's perfect dawn, people were invoking the name of the Eternal One. How did they even know it? Who first whispered Yahweh under breath, a breath still warmed by the breath of God? Could it be that despite humanity's stumble into sin, God was already stooping low, revealing his name to any heart that dared to seek him? This sacred name did not make its debut at the burning bush. No, Yahweh's name was already recognized, spoken, perhaps even chanted by voices generations before Moses ever set foot on that holy mountain. Does it not stir your spirit to realize that you are connected by an invisible thread to countless souls who invoked this same name long before your own birth? What would it be like if you, standing in your own contemporary wilderness, heard that same timeless voice calling out, "I am who I am"? Would you, like Moses, conceal your face in wonder and fear? Or would you dare to draw closer, heart pounding, to discover the profound depth of this divine relationship? And before Jacob became Israel, the name of Yahweh was already being whispered among various peoples. Who were these enigmatic ancient worshippers of God? How did they come to know the God we primarily associate with Israel? Imagine stepping into that primeval world where rivers flowed pristine, and the voices of humanity first began to resonate across the plains. If Moses was not the first to tremble at the sound of Yahweh's name, then who was? This question hangs in the air like incense, drawing us deeper into the narrative. And what does this reveal about a grander divine scheme, one that spans across eras and nations? This isn't merely a piece of biblical trivia. It's a truth that could fundamentally alter your perception of God's unfolding narrative. The deeper we explore, the more we grasp the immense scope of God's plan, far beyond our initial conceptions. What if his influence was already shaping history long before the very existence of Israel? Are you prepared to uncover this astonishing truth? To truly comprehend this mystery, let's begin by defining Yahweh. Consider the profound scene in Exodus 3, where Moses, formerly an Egyptian prince and now a humble shepherd, stands on sacred ground ablaze with divine fire. A bush burns without being consumed, filling Moses with both fear and awe. In that pivotal moment, Moses bravely asks, "What is your name?" From the heart of the flame, a powerful yet intimate voice declares words that resonate through eternity. "I am who I am." Can you feel the weight of this? A God beyond time and human comprehension chooses to reveal himself in a language we can barely grasp. But the revelation continues. In Exodus 3:15, God instructs Moses to tell the people of Israel, "Yahweh, the God of your ancestors, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, has sent me to you." This subtle yet profound statement suggests that Yahweh wasn't a newly emerging deity from the desert mists. Rather, he was already intrinsically woven into the fabric of their historical lineage, long before Moses encountered the divine fire. If you were an Israelite hearing this, wouldn't your mind race back to family narratives whispered around campfires, recalling Abraham hearing God's voice under starlit skies, or Jacob wrestling with a divine being by the river? Could it be that Yahweh's name, his very essence, was already etched into their collective memory well before the thunder of Sinai reverberated across the wilderness? The name Yahweh itself originates from the ancient Hebrew verb to be, encapsulating not merely existence, ancient echoes of Yahweh's name. Let's turn back the clock, not merely by years, but by epochs, to a time when the dust of Eden was still fresh on humanity's feet. Journey with me all the way back to Genesis. Remarkably, the divine name Yahweh is not hidden in some clandestine scroll, but appears explicitly in Genesis 4:26. Fast forward through dusty genealogies and winding family lines to Genesis 12-8. Abraham, a wandering nomad bearing promises vaster than the horizon, arrives in Canaan. Melchizedek, a priest of the Most High. Now, transport your imagination to a scene enshrouded in shadows and wonder. In Genesis 14, a figure emerges from the mists of history mysterious, majestic, and departing almost as swiftly as he appears. And praise be to God Most High, who delivered your enemies into your hand, who instructed him about Yahweh, the eternal I Am. The scriptures provide no details of his familial ties. He is not connected to Abraham's bloodline, nor does he trace his ancestry to Israel, which had not yet come into being. However, do not let that straightforward title deceive you. His story is far richer and more enigmatic. Picture Moses in exile, divested of his royal garments, tending stubborn, woolly sheep across the desolate stretches of Midian. The scripture paints the scene with striking clarity. Now Moses was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian. There, in a land whose very soil remains unnamed to us, lived a man whose story might be older than the books of Moses themselves. Hear his voice trembling with unshakable hope. "I know that my Redeemer lives, and that in the end he will stand on the earth." Or observe Jethro breaking bread with Israel's elders in the wilderness. One truth consistently emerges. Yahweh was already present, revealing himself, stirring souls, and drawing worship from unexpected lips long before Israel carried stone tablets down. Sinai. And does this thread of revelation not still extend towards you? If God could whisper his name to a non-Israelite shepherd in Midian, meet a mysterious king-priest in Salem, and speak comfort to a grieving father in Uz, what might he be longing to reveal to you in your own corner of the world? Could your deepest questions, your partially understood longings, and even your failures be the very ground where Yahweh chooses to plant his answers? This is why their stories matter. They are not dusty relics. They are living signposts pointing us to a God who has always been closer than we dared imagine. So let's draw closer still and discover what more this timeless God might wish to unveil in your own story. Can you grasp the magnitude of this? Job doesn't speak of Yahweh as a tribal war god confined to tents and altars in dusty deserts. He knows him as Redeemer, personal, righteous, sovereign over all. And Job wasn't alone in wrestling with Yahweh's mysteries. His friends, flawed though they were, debated the justice, mercy, and purposes of God. Together, they grappled with the same thorny questions that continue to plague us in the quiet hours of the night. Why do the innocent suffer? How can a mortal approach the Almighty? Does it not strike you that long before Israel's priests offered incense, people far from Zion were already pondering the very heart of Yahweh? This significantly expands our perspective. Job's story demonstrates that the knowledge of the true God was not confined to Israel's borders. It lived and breathed among people scattered across the ancient world, people who argued, wept, worshipped, and clung to hope under unfamiliar stars. And why should that surprise us? Did not Paul later write in Romans 1:19-20, "For what can be known about God is plain to them, because God has shown it to them. For since the creation of the world, God has invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that people are without excuse." The fingerprints of Yahweh are imprinted on every sunrise, every rustling tree, every yearning human heart that dares to seek him. His name is Job, and his life holds a revelation so profound, nearly defies belief. Think about it. Job was not an Israelite. His blood did not flow from Abraham's veins, nor did his children grow up hearing stories of Jacob's ladder or Joseph's dreams. Yet, woven through every chapter of this ancient text is Job's intensely personal, almost agonizing relationship with Yahweh. When tragedy strikes like a sudden storm, his livestock stolen, his servants slaughtered, his children crushed beneath a collapsing house, what does Job cry out? "The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord." Pause and let that resonate. The Hebrew behind Lord is YHW, Yahweh. Isn't it astonishing? Here stands a man outside the chosen family line, blessing the sacred name of the living God with lips still quivering from grief. Read that again. Jethro was a priest, not of some carved idol or pagan deity, but a priest who somehow already served the true God long before stone tablets descended from Sinai. Isn't that intriguing? As Moses guided flocks by day and gazed at desert stars by night, did he ever contemplate Jethro as quiet wisdom, or the prayers his father-in-law whispered when no one else was listening? Could it be that God had placed Moses under Jethro's roof to learn lessons about humble faith before he would stand trembling in the firelight of Yahweh himself? Hebrews 7 plunges the mystery even deeper, portraying Melchizedek as without father or mother, without genealogy, without beginning of days or end of life. Resembling the Son of God, he remains a priest forever. And miracles that rendered even Pharaoh's magicians speechless, Jethro comes to visit. What transpires next might just astound you. Jethro rejoiced for all the good that the Lord had done to Israel. And Jethro said, "Blessed be Yahweh, who has delivered you out of the hand of the Egyptians. Now I know that Yahweh is greater than all gods." Pause there. Feel the gravity of those words. Jethro doesn't merely offer polite praise. He uses the sacred name Yahweh, proclaiming him supreme over all other gods. And then he does something profound. Jethro brought a burnt offering and sacrifices to God, and Aaron came with all the elders of Israel to eat bread with Moses as father-in-law before God. Imagine that moment, an aged Midianite priest surrounded by Israel's leaders, all sharing a meal in Yahweh's presence. No divine rebuke falls from heaven. No angel intervenes to correct Jethro. Instead, there is fellowship, joy, and worship. Does this not broaden your understanding of God's ways? Jethro's story reveals that Yahweh's presence was never confined behind tribal fences. His voice was already echoing through distant lands, calling to hearts that dared to listen. It wasn't about bloodlines or banners. It was about souls yearning for truth. Could there be more Jethros out there, men and women in forgotten valleys or foreign courts, quietly walking with Yahweh while the world remains oblivious? And does that not extend across time to you as well? What if God's hand has always been broader than we dared to imagine, inscribing stories of grace in places we might never think to look? Could he be inviting you to perceive that his light was always piercing the shadows, spreading silently like dawn before anyone noticed it was morning? Jethro stands as a luminous testament that Yahweh's kingdom was never intended to be small. His story whispers that true worship transcends borders, languages, and family trees. And astonishingly, there is still more hidden proof within these ancient pages. More unlikely worshippers of Yahweh waiting to step out of the shadows. Shall we continue our search for them? Does that not send shivers down your spine? Some ponder if this was a Christ-like figure, a divine foreshadowing pointing to Jesus, who would one day break bread and lift a cup in a far more profound covenant. Yet, regardless of whether Melchizedek was a celestial manifestation or merely a man entrusted with profound revelation, one truth shines brightly. The worship of Yahweh was already fervently alive beyond the confines of Abraham's tent. Isn't that astonishing? Even as Abraham journeyed through uncharted territories, God was sowing seeds of truth into distant hearts. He had priests and kings, worshippers of his sacred name, living and serving him in places Abraham had never set foot. Can you imagine how many Melchizedeks might have existed across ancient lands, unknown, yet faithful souls who constructed altars under unfamiliar skies, whispering Yahweh's name while empires rose and fell around them? And does this not resonate with our own world, suggesting that God's work is never restricted by the lines we draw on maps or the communities we delineate? What if you were living in Abraham's era and encountered this king-priest? Would your spirit recognize something sacred emanating from him? Would you have dared to bow your head and receive that blessing spoken in the name of the Most High? Melchizedek stands as a breathtaking reminder that Yahweh's reach has always extended far beyond human perception. Before Israel's law and priests, before tabernacles and temples, God was already being worshipped in the most unexpected places. And this implies that even today, he may be raising up voices in hidden corners of the earth, calling on hearts that quietly know his name, awaiting the revelation of mysteries that still elude our complete understanding. Shall we continue our search for more? Let's venture a little further down this ancient path, for Melchizedek was only the beginning. There are others concealed within these ancient scrolls whose lives gleam with the same unexpected reverence for Yahweh. Feel the weight of that moment. Abraham, the progenitor of nations, stands before this enigmatic priest and offers him a tenth of all his possessions. Can you perceive the silent awe in that gesture? A tithe offered not under the rubric of law, for no law yet existed, but out of a recognition of a shared reverence for Yahweh. Have you ever paused long enough to truly contemplate Melchizedek? Picture it. Abraham, weary from battle, leading his men and their reacquired captives through rugged valleys. Then, without any forewarning, a stranger steps forward. Then Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. He was priest of God Most High. Isn't that enough to quicken your pulse? Long before Moses ever ascended Sinai's slopes, before a single Levite donned priestly garments, there stood Melchizedek, already a priest of Yahweh, the Most High God. How could this be? How did he come to serve the very God whose name would later thunder from Mount Sinai? Observe what unfolds. This king-priest blesses Abraham with words imbued with heavenly fragrance. Blessed be Abram by God Most High, creator of heaven and earth. Now, allow a question to stir your thoughts. Where did Melchizedek originate? Jethro, the Midianite priest. Consider Jethro. Yes, Jethro, a man you might simply remember as Moses' father-in-law. And observe how their paths converge once more. After Israel's dramatic escape from Egypt, following plagues, parted seas, Job, a universal worshiper. Now let your imagination wander to windswept plains far beyond Canaan, to a place untouched by Israel's lineage. But Job's faith does more than simply endure sorrow. It reaches into eternity. So, whether we examine the life of Job lamenting on his ash heap, glimpse Melchizedek blessing Abraham outside Salem's gates, Balaam, a prophet of paradox. Now, let your mind wander to a dusty road in a distant land, where a man sits astride his donkey, entangled in thoughts darker than he'd ever admit. His name is Balaam, and he might just be one of the most confounding figures ever to traverse the pages of Scripture. Here stands a man outside of Israel, deeply immersed in questionable ambitions and shadowy motives. Yet somehow he finds himself in direct conversation with Yahweh, the very God who thundered on Sinai and whispered promises to Abraham under the stars. And witnessing Abraham build altars to a name older than his own covenant, we are left with one pressing question that lingers in the air like incense. It shatters every narrow notion we might harbor that Yahweh belongs solely to one tribe, one family, or one chosen nation. It was never small, never provincial, never limited by language or borders. Long before covenants were etched into stone, Yahweh was inscribing his name upon human hearts across the world, calling worshipers from places no map of Israel ever touched. Before you ever lifted your eyes to search for him, he was already reaching out, tracing the fragile lines of your story with hands that sculpted the galaxies. That name, Yahweh, has echoed from Eden's gates to your very threshold. In the pages of the New Testament, this name takes on flesh and breath in Yeshua Jesus, whose very name means Yahweh saves. Can you feel the tenderness of that? The same eternal I Am, who spoke from burning bushes and through trembling prophets, wrapped himself in human skin simply to rescue you. Just as he spoke comfort into Job's storm of grief, just as he walked step by step with Enoch until heaven simply enveloped him, just as he called Abraham out from the familiar idols of yore into a future he could ain't yet perceive, so too is he calling you right now wherever you stand. And here's where it gently intertwines with your own life. Perhaps you've always carried the quiet suspicion that God only acts through certain individuals, those born into the right lineage, raised under the proper teachings, fluent in the language of holy things. Will you dare to seek him, even if you've always felt like you stood outside the usual lines of blessing? Could you begin to listen for his voice in your own wilderness, just as Job did on his ash heap, as Abraham did under foreign stars, as countless souls did long before Israel ever delineated its borders? Because the astonishing reality is that Yahweh's reach has never been confined by geography or ancestry. He has always been crossing rivers, breaking down walls, whispering across languages and customs to find hearts willing to answer. Perhaps right now, in the quiet space between your heartbeats, he is doing precisely that with you. Will you respond to this God who has been stretching across centuries and cultures, across your own doubts and detours, to gently call your name? Could this be the moment you finally step into the great unfolding story he's been writing all along, where your life becomes yet another place? His name is honored from the beginning of your day to its end? Is that not a mystery worth embracing? Perhaps you felt like an outsider looking in, unqualified because your story doesn't conform to what you believed God preferred. But you see, that's precisely why these ancient voices are crucial. They demonstrate that Yahweh delights in revealing himself to unexpected people in unexpected places. His story has always stretched far beyond human boundaries. And that means you, yes, you are caught up in this vast, unfolding narrative. You are not too far away, not too late, not from the wrong soil. Could it be that he has been quietly drawing you all along, just as he did with shepherds in Midian and prophets near the Euphrates? What if your heart, with all its questions, scars, and secret hopes, is precisely the kind of place Yahweh loves to visit? What if your life was destined to be another living altar where his name is praised from the moment your day begins until its final setting? That is the wonder of it all. His story is bigger, wider, and more beautifully inclusive than we ever dared to dream. And your story is at its very core. So take a breath, lift your eyes, and realize that this same Yahweh who walked with Job, who spoke to Balaam, who feasted with Jethro, is calling you by name even now. Will you lean in closer to hear what he might be saying next? From the very dawn of human history, his voice echoed across mountain ranges and whispered through desert winds to any heart willing to pause and listen. From the rising of the sun to its setting, the name of the Lord is to be praised. Imagine that, from every horizon, in every forgotten village and bustling city, Yahweh was already planting seeds of his truth, long before Israel raised their first banner. Think about Jethro, quietly tending flocks in Midian, yet already bowing before the Most High. Think about Job, grieving in ashes, yet speaking of Yahweh as his living Redeemer. Think about Melchizedek, standing mysteriously under Salem's skies, blessing Abraham in the sacred name of the Creator. Even Balaam, entangled in greed and flawed ambitions, found himself overtaken by divine revelation, uttering prophecies of a coming star and scepter in Israel that would one day point directly to Christ. Why does any of this matter? Why take the time to trace how Yahweh was known and worshipped long before Israel carried stone tablets down Sinai? Can you perceive how shocking this is? In Numbers 22-9, it simply states, "And God came to Balaam and said, 'Who are these men with you?'" This is not a vague dream or a fleeting impression. This is intimate dialogue, the same kind reserved for patriarchs and prophets. And when Balaam responds to Balak's emissaries, his words emerge with startling familiarity. "Go to your own land, for the Lord, Yahweh, has refused to let me go with you." Pause here. Let that sink in. Balaam, residing in Pithir near the Euphrates, hundreds of miles from Israel, likely nestled somewhere in ancient Syria or Mesopotamia, uses the covenant name Yahweh. Not just any God, not an abstract Elohim, but YHWH, the sacred name first spoken from a burning bush that remained unconsumed. How did this foreign seer come to recognize that voice so clearly that he could not only converse with it, but also obey, at least for a time? The questions swirl like desert winds. Who taught Balaam to listen for Yahweh? How long had he known that name? Perhaps whispering it under his breath when the moon climbed high over distant hills? And why would the Most High even bother speaking to a man who lay outside the embrace of his covenant people? The answers are infused with holy mystery. Yes, Balaam would later reveal the moral decay within him: greed, vanity, spiritual compromise. The New Testament does not shy away from this, warning us in 2 Peter 2:15 and Revelation 2:14 of his twisted legacy. Yet consider what happens when King Balak hires Balaam to hurl curses upon Israel. God seizes that moment, completely overturning human schemes, and transforms Balaam's mouth into a fountain of unexpected blessing. How can I curse whom God has not cursed? How can I denounce whom the Lord has not denounced? Isn't that breathtaking? Even more astonishing, from Balaam's flawed lips pours forth a prophecy that spans centuries, pointing directly to Christ himself. I see him, but not now. I behold him, but not near. A star shall come out of Jacob, and a scepter shall rise out of Israel. Imagine a pagan prophet hired to sabotage God's people, instead proclaiming the advent of the Messiah. Does that not challenge your expectations of whom God can use? This story is complex and tangled, yet it illuminates something profound. Yahweh's voice is not constrained by human boundaries. His plans are not thwarted by borders, bloodlines, or even the corrupted hearts of those who attempt to profit from his power. Balaam's encounters serve as a reminder that God has always been engaged in a global mission, revealing himself far beyond the tents of Israel, long before Moses ever struck rock for water, and long after kings ruled from Jerusalem's throne. And does this not pose a gentle, haunting question for us today? If God could speak through Balaam, a man whose feet were caked in foreign soil, and whose motives were muddied by silver, what might he be longing to say through you in your own unpredictable story? Could your struggles, your half-understood longings, even your failures, be places where God still chooses to manifest his purposes? Balaam's life whispers a truth that reaches directly into our own. Yahweh's voice cannot be contained. It breaks through flawed prophets, misguided plans, and even rebellious hearts, weaving a narrative of redemption that no one can thwart. The only truly significant question is whether we are willing to quiet our ambitions and genuinely listen. Would you have heard him if he was standing on that road beside Balaam? Perhaps, in more ways than we dare to believe, he is still speaking even now. The enduring significance for today. So after traversing all these ancient landscapes, after encountering Job under distant skies, marveling at Melchizedek's mysterious blessings sharing in Jethro's joyful sacrifice, listening in stunned silence as Balaam's lips proclaimed Yahweh's sovereignty. It matters because it uncovers something truly breathtaking about God's heart. Doesn't this expand your perception of God's story? God's intimate pursuit. But here lies a truth more intimate and staggering than any ancient mystery we've uncovered thus far. God sees you. And woven into this breathtaking pursuit is the very heart of the gospel. Everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. So, what will you do with this mystery that spans millennia to find its resting place at your doorstep? Thank you for watching. Please help us like this video and leave a comment below. May God bless you.